When you picture cybersecurity for the first time, it is easy to imagine it as a battle that happens mostly on computers and servers, but the network in between those systems is often where real control is won or lost. Network infrastructure includes the devices and services that move traffic, separate systems into safer zones, and decide what is allowed to communicate with what. Routers and firewalls are two of the most important pieces of that infrastructure, because routers direct traffic between networks and firewalls enforce rules about which connections are permitted. If these devices are misconfigured, outdated, or poorly managed, an attacker can sometimes reach sensitive systems without needing to defeat stronger protections deeper inside. In payment environments, networks also serve as boundaries that keep the most sensitive systems isolated, so a mistake in network design can quietly expand the area an attacker can explore. A comprehensive approach to securing network infrastructure focuses on correct design, careful configuration, strict access control, reliable monitoring, and disciplined maintenance over time. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good starting point is understanding what a router really does, because beginners sometimes treat it like a mysterious box that simply provides internet. A router moves traffic from one network to another by reading destination addresses and deciding which path the traffic should take, which is why it often sits at the edge of a network or between internal segments. In many environments, routers also enforce basic traffic rules and can participate in network segmentation, meaning they help keep different groups of systems separated. The security risk is that routers become critical choke points, so if someone can change routing rules, they can redirect traffic, create hidden paths, or open access to networks that were meant to be isolated. Another risk is that routers often have management interfaces used by administrators, and if those interfaces are exposed or poorly protected, attackers can target them directly. Beginners sometimes assume that routers are set and forget devices, but routers are active parts of security, and their configurations need the same care as any sensitive system. When you view routers as guardians of traffic flow rather than passive hardware, it becomes clear why hardening and monitoring them matters. Firewalls are often described as the security gatekeepers of networks, but it is important to understand what that means in practice so you do not overestimate what a firewall can do. At a basic level, a firewall filters traffic based on rules, such as which source addresses, destination addresses, ports, and protocols are allowed. Many firewalls also track connection state, meaning they understand whether a packet belongs to an established connection, which helps block certain attacks and prevents some forms of spoof traffic. More advanced firewalls can inspect traffic more deeply, but the beginner lesson is that a firewall is only as effective as its rule set and how well that rule set matches reality. A common misunderstanding is believing a firewall automatically blocks all bad traffic, but firewalls mostly enforce what you tell them to enforce. If you allow overly broad access for convenience, the firewall will faithfully permit it, even if it creates unnecessary risk. Comprehensive firewall security therefore starts with designing rules that reflect the principle of least privilege, meaning only the traffic truly needed for business is allowed. Network segmentation is one of the most powerful ideas for protecting sensitive environments, and it becomes easier to understand if you think in terms of separating rooms in a building. If every room connects to every other room with open doors, then a person who enters one room can wander everywhere. Segmentation creates controlled doors, meaning you decide which systems can connect and which cannot, and you can place the most sensitive systems in a more restricted area. Routers and firewalls are key tools for segmentation because they sit at the boundaries between segments and enforce separation through routing rules and filtering. In payment-related environments, segmentation often helps keep systems that handle sensitive data away from general office networks, guest networks, and development systems that should not have access. Beginners sometimes assume segmentation is only about making smaller networks, but the real point is reducing blast radius, meaning a compromise in one area cannot easily spread. Comprehensive network security focuses on segmentation that is intentional, documented, and tested, because a segmentation plan that exists only on paper is not a real boundary. Once you accept that rules define safety, it becomes important to talk about how those rules are created and maintained without turning them into a tangled mess. Many organizations start with a few rules, then add more rules each time a new application or exception appears, and over time the rule set becomes confusing and risky. A comprehensive approach treats firewall and router rules like important code, meaning changes are reviewed, documented, and justified, rather than being added casually. One simple concept that helps is using an access control list, ACL, which is a set of rules that permits or denies traffic based on defined conditions, and the safety comes from being explicit rather than vague. Beginners often misunderstand rules as a single allow or block decision, but in practice rules are a language that describes how systems are allowed to interact. When rules are designed with clarity, you can explain why each rule exists, which system needs it, and what risk it introduces. That clarity makes it easier to remove outdated rules, which is critical because old rules often remain long after the original reason disappeared. A comprehensive security mindset also pays close attention to management access, because an attacker who can manage network devices can often reshape the entire security landscape. Management access includes how administrators log into routers and firewalls, where that access is allowed from, and what level of privilege each administrator has. Good practice is to restrict management interfaces so they are not reachable from general networks or the public internet, and to require strong authentication for anyone who can make changes. Beginners sometimes assume that a device is safe if it is inside the network, but internal exposure can still be risky because phishing and malware often originate from inside after an initial compromise. It is also important to separate roles so not everyone has full administrative power, because full power increases the impact of mistakes and creates stronger targets for attackers. Logging administrative actions matters as well, because you want a record of who changed what and when, especially when investigating incidents. When management access is controlled, attackers have fewer chances to use legitimate tools against you, and your network devices become more trustworthy guardians. The configuration of routers and firewalls also depends on having accurate knowledge of what the network is supposed to do, which is where documentation and data flow understanding become practical. If you do not know which systems must communicate, you are more likely to create overly permissive rules that allow everything just in case. Data flows describe where information travels, and for payment systems this is critical because you want to know which components should see sensitive data and which should not. A comprehensive approach uses data flows to justify rules, so each permitted connection supports a defined business function and can be defended logically. Beginners sometimes see network diagrams as optional paperwork, but diagrams are how you make invisible pathways visible, and visibility is a prerequisite for control. When documentation is accurate, it helps prevent accidental scope expansion, such as a reporting system suddenly being granted access into a sensitive segment. It also supports troubleshooting, because when a connection fails, you can confirm whether it should exist rather than blindly opening rules to make it work. Clear documentation turns rule management from guesswork into disciplined engineering. Monitoring and detection are essential because networks change, attackers probe, and misconfigurations happen, and without visibility you may not realize your controls are failing. At a beginner level, monitoring means collecting logs and signals that show what traffic is being allowed or blocked, what administrative changes were made, and whether unusual patterns are appearing. You can think of it as keeping security cameras at the building entrances rather than only watching what happens inside rooms. Some environments also use an intrusion detection system, IDS, which is a system that watches for suspicious patterns in network traffic and alerts when something looks like an attack, but the key concept is not the tool name. The key concept is that monitoring should help you answer practical questions, such as whether sensitive segments are receiving unexpected traffic or whether new destinations are being contacted repeatedly. Beginners sometimes assume that blocking is enough, but attackers often test boundaries slowly, and early detection can reveal probing before it becomes a breach. Comprehensive network security designs monitoring so it is meaningful, reviewed, and tied to response procedures rather than being a pile of ignored alerts. Another beginner-friendly but important idea is that reliability and security are connected in network infrastructure, because unstable networks often push people toward unsafe shortcuts. When the network is unreliable, teams may request broad firewall exceptions, disable inspection features, or open remote access widely just to restore service, and those emergency changes can linger. Comprehensive security, therefore, includes designing for resilience, meaning you plan for redundant paths, controlled failover, and predictable behavior when devices or links fail. It also includes practicing how changes are made during incidents so that people can restore service without erasing important controls. In payment environments, availability matters because outages interrupt transactions, but hasty recovery can create exposures that are harder to unwind later. Beginners sometimes see security and uptime as competing goals, but they are often aligned when done well, because stable systems are easier to secure and safer to modify. When resilience is planned, you can keep segmentation and rule discipline intact even during stressful events. A comprehensive approach treats continuity as part of security rather than as a separate concern. Secure remote connectivity is another area where routers and firewalls play a major role, and it is easy for beginners to underestimate how quickly remote access can become a risk multiplier. Many organizations use virtual private network (VPN) connections to allow remote users or sites to connect securely, but the mere existence of a secure tunnel does not guarantee safe access. The critical question is what the remote user or site is allowed to reach once connected, and whether that access matches the principle of least privilege. Firewalls and routing rules should ensure that remote access pathways do not provide broad visibility into sensitive segments, especially segments connected to payment systems. Beginners often assume that if a person is authenticated, they should be able to reach everything they need. But in security, you design access so that authentication is only the first step and segmentation remains in force. Monitoring remote access is also important because attackers frequently seek stolen credentials to enter through trusted remote pathways. Comprehensive security treats remote access as a controlled entry point with clear boundaries, strong authentication, and limited routes, rather than as a universal back door into the network. The idea of secure defaults matters deeply in network devices, because routers and firewalls often ship with features enabled for convenience that may not be appropriate for production environments. Secure configuration involves disabling unnecessary services, using strong authentication methods, limiting management exposure, and ensuring that only required protocols and features are active. Beginners sometimes assume default settings are safe because they come from a vendor, but vendors must design for many use cases, and defaults are often designed for easy initial setup rather than high-security operation. Configuration also includes maintaining accurate time on devices, because logs without reliable timestamps are much less useful for investigations and troubleshooting. Some environments use Network Time Protocol (NTP) to synchronize clocks across devices, and the essential beginner point is that time consistency helps you build a trustworthy incident timeline. Comprehensive security includes validating that device configurations remain aligned with standards over time, because drift can happen when people make quick changes and forget to document them. When secure defaults and drift control are treated as routine operational practices, network infrastructure becomes more predictable and less vulnerable. Change management for network infrastructure deserves special emphasis because network changes can have wide consequences that reach far beyond one device. A small routing change can reroute traffic through an unintended path. A firewall rule can expose a sensitive system to a broader network, and a misapplied update can disrupt connectivity for critical services. Comprehensive security treats changes as controlled events, meaning changes are requested, reviewed, approved, tested where possible, and documented with clear reasons. Beginners sometimes view change control as bureaucracy, but it is actually a safety system that reduces both outages and security mistakes. It also enables accountability, because if something goes wrong, you can trace what changed and roll back deliberately rather than guessing. In payment environments, change control helps maintain scoping boundaries, because network changes are one of the fastest ways to accidentally expand what systems can touch sensitive flows. Comprehensive change management also includes emergency procedures, because emergencies do happen. But even emergency changes should be recorded and reviewed afterward to prevent temporary openings from becoming permanent holes. When change discipline is built into network operations, security controls stay stable and defensible. It is also important to understand that security requires regular maintenance because attackers evolve and network devices, like all technology, age and accumulate risk. Maintenance includes patching network device software, reviewing configurations for outdated rules, rotating credentials, and verifying that backups of configurations exist and are protected. It also includes periodic audits of segmentation to confirm that the boundary between sensitive and non-sensitive segments is still real and has not been weakened by incremental changes. Beginners sometimes assume that networks are done once they work, but in security, working is only the beginning, because today's safe configuration can become tomorrow's vulnerability as new exploits are discovered. Regular reviews can also reveal unused pathways, such as rules that were created for a project that ended long ago, and removing those pathways reduces attack surface. Maintenance is also where you validate monitoring, ensuring logs are still being collected and alerts still make sense, because monitoring systems can fail silently. Comprehensive security treats maintenance as a normal rhythm, not as a reaction to breaches, because prevention is cheaper and calmer than cleanup. When networks are maintained thoughtfully, they remain dependable foundations rather than hidden liabilities. Finally, comprehensive network security benefits from thinking like an attacker just enough to anticipate where they would push first, without turning the discussion into fear or complexity. Attackers often look for exposed management interfaces, overly permissive rules, weak remote access boundaries, and forgotten segments that were never properly secured. They also look for paths that allow them to pivot, meaning move from one compromised system to others by exploiting connectivity that was never intended for broad access. Routers and firewalls can either prevent that pivoting or make it effortless, depending on how carefully segmentation and rule design are implemented. Beginners sometimes assume attackers always use sophisticated exploits, but many real intrusions rely on simple misconfigurations and weak credential protection. Comprehensive security therefore focuses on basics done consistently. Control management access, keep configurations tight, review rules regularly, and monitor for unusual changes or traffic patterns. When you combine that discipline with good documentation and change control, the network becomes a controlled environment rather than a maze of accidental pathways. Thinking in terms of predictable attacker choices helps you prioritize the highest value protections. As we wrap up, it helps to see network infrastructure security as a long-term discipline that connects design, configuration, access control, monitoring, and maintenance into one coherent system. Routers guide traffic and enforce key boundaries. Firewalls filter connections based on rules, and together they create segmentation that reduces blast radius and protects sensitive systems connected to payment workflows. Rule sets and ACL decisions must be explicit, justified by real data flows, and managed through careful change control so convenience does not quietly undermine security. Management access is one of the highest risk areas, which is why strong authentication, restricted reachability, and detailed logging matter so much for protecting the devices that protect everything else. Monitoring, including signals from firewalls, routers, and sometimes IDS capabilities, provides the visibility needed to detect probing, misconfiguration, and misuse before small problems become major incidents. Resilience planning, secure remote access boundaries, secure configuration defaults, and maintenance practices like patching and periodic review keep the environment stable and defensible over time. For a new learner, the main mindset shift is realizing that networks are not just plumbing. They are security boundaries, and securing routers and firewalls comprehensively is one of the clearest ways to turn security intentions into enforceable reality.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.